Welcome to the Daily Bite with your host, Pastor Steve Andrews.
Today's text is John chapter 2. On the third day there was a wedding at Cana in Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. Jesus also was invited to the wedding with his disciples. When the wine ran out, the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no wine." And Jesus said to her, "Woman, what does this have to do with me? My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Now there were 6 stone water jars there for the Jewish rites of purification, each holding 20 or 30 gallons. Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars with water." And they filled them up to the brim. And he said to them, "Now draw some out and take it to the master of the feast." So they took it. When the master of the feast tasted the water now become wine, and did not know where it came from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew, the master of the feast called the bridegroom and said to him, "Everyone serves the good wine first, and when people have drunk freely, then the poor wine. But you have kept the good wine until now." This, the first of his signs, Jesus did at Cana in Galilee, and manifested his glory, and his disciples believed in him. After this he went down to Capernaum with his mother and his brother and his disciples, and they stayed there for a few days. The Passover of the Jews was at hand, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. In the temple he found those who were selling oxen and sheep and pigeons, and the money changers sitting there. And, making a whip of cords, he drove them all out of the temple with the sheep and oxen. And he poured out the coins of the money changers and overturned their tables. And he told those who sold the pigeons, "Take these things away. Do not make my Father's house a house of trade." His disciples remembered that it was written, "Zeal for your house will consume me." So the Jews said to him, "What sign do you show us for doing these things?" Jesus answered them, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up." The Jews then said, "It has taken 46 years to build this temple, and will you raise it up in 3 days?" But he was speaking about the temple of his body. When therefore he was raised from the dead, his disciples remembered that he had said this, and they believed the scripture and the word that Jesus had spoken. Now, when he was in Jerusalem at the Passover feast, many believed in his name when they saw the signs that he was doing. But Jesus on his part did not entrust himself to them, because he knew all people, and needed no one to bear witness about man, for he himself knew what was in man. This is the word of the Lord. So chapter 2, John's going to jump right into the miracles of Jesus Christ with what he records as being the very first miracle that Jesus performed, and even, we might even say, didn't want to. So we start at the wedding at Cana in Galilee. So let's do context. Cana is 9 miles north of Nazareth, roughly 15 miles west of the Sea of Galilee. Thus, it's in Galilee. Jesus is at this wedding, together with his mother, together with the disciples who have also been invited to come. They run out of wine. Weddings then weren't like they are today. There are definitely differences. And this could be a fun family conversation. What are wedding celebrations like today? Talk about that. Talk about what it might be nice someday for your child's wedding to look like. And I lean towards the simpler. I miss the days, which I didn't even actually know, but I miss the days when weddings didn't cost $30,000 and were held actually as part of the church service, with a small reception afterwards by the members of the church and close family. The rite of marriage was performed in the Sunday morning worship service, instead of being stripped away from the church, from being a part of the congregational life, and made into this big affair that costs a lot of money. Just a different era that we live in right now. But you can talk about receptions and things like that. The pattern, by and large, in the ancient world, especially here, is the idea of a week-long feast. So you think like a 7-hour reception's a long thing. A week-long feast. And as the family, the couple, you were providing that feast. And so the point often stressed here with the first miracle of Jesus is that Jesus is blessing this couple. He's blessing their marriage together with this gift, but he's also saving them public embarrassment because they ran out of wine. They couldn't well provide to have a feast for everyone that came. So shame for failing to do so. But as we look at the text, it doesn't come across, I think, as cleanly as I've usually heard it myself when I hear pastors teach or preach on it. Mom, so Mary, points out that they've run out of wine. And Jesus responds to her, "Woman, what does this have to do with me? My hour has not yet come." His hour, his time to begin his journey, to do the things he's going to do as he heads towards Jerusalem to die on the cross to forgive our sins and rise again from the dead. That hour, it hasn't come yet. He said no. He wasn't just going to perform a little magic trick to make people happy. That's not why he's come. He declined his mother's. She hasn't technically made a request yet, but he's declined it already. And what does she do? How does Mary respond to this? She pushes anyway. Her son, the Son of God, God in the flesh, said no, and she pushed onward. Do whatever he tells you, she says to the servants. So her desire to help the couple, commendable. Her desire to make Jesus do something outside of the plan of God. Her desire to push him to do a miracle when he said it wasn't time yet. That's not as good. But he does it anyway. Perhaps more out of respect for his mom. It's hard to say. So he has the servants gather the stone water jars that are there. They're for the Jewish rites of purification. So that's things like washing their hands and so forth. Each hold 20 to 30 gallons. You can let your kids do the math if they're up for it. But that's 120 to 180 gallons worth of water. He has them fill them. And they go and they fill them to the brim. Then he tells them to take some out and take it to the master of the feast. So they took it. I don't know about you, but if that had been me, if I had been that servant, I would be quite a bit nervous about approaching the master of the banquet with a glass of water when he's asked for more wine. But again, they obey Jesus and they do what he's given them to do and they take it. Master of the feast, by the way, in the Greek, the word is a compound word. It's really ruler of 3 couches, which is kind of an interesting phrase. So master of the feast, he rules over, he oversees the celebration. So whether he's part of the family, so now we've got a husband and a wife getting married, maybe it's the father-in-law of the young man, maybe it's the bride's father, and so maybe they're having this celebration at his home, and so he's hosting things. More likely it's not. Could be a hired guest to come and oversee how the party goes. I mean, it's a week-long party. You're going to need some help. So a hired guest to take care of making sure things are arranged appropriately, taking care of making sure the servants are doing their job, because as the couple, you're going to be mingling with your family and friends, enjoying the party yourselves. You just got married. So they take it to the master of the feast, and he takes a drink. He summons the groom, and this is probably part of the story people know well. Everyone serves the good wine first, and when people have drunk freely, the poor wine. You serve the good stuff while people are sober, that they may drink and they may enjoy that taste. And once they're already a little tipsy, once they're drunk, then you serve the not as good stuff, the cheap stuff, because it doesn't matter anymore. But not the groom. Not this guy, not you. You served the best last. So he's impressed, kind of taken aback, shocked a little bit here by this. As you can imagine, the bridegroom himself probably a little shocked by this, not knowing what in the world the master was talking about. Who does know? Verse 9, the servants who had drawn the water knew. They knew. They pulled that water. They put it in the pot. They took the water out of that jar and brought it up to the master. They knew it was water. But now it's not. Some commentary looking over for this one, I saw a few suggestions that this is probably the best wine ever. Probably? Jesus made this wine himself. There's never been a better wine. I mean, if you're going to say something's better, it's Christ's body and blood in the Lord's Supper. And again, that comes from Christ himself. So this is right there as the greatest wine mankind has ever had the ability to taste. And mankind likes its wine. They've been drinking it for years, specializing in it. This is the good stuff. So this was his first sign, his first miracle, in which he manifested his glory. Manifest, make known, reveal. He revealed to some who he was. And again, as he had told Mary, his mom, it wasn't time yet. His hour had not yet come. So after this, he goes down. That's elevational, down. From there to Capernaum. So it's about a 20-mile journey northeast-east. Capernaum's on the northwest side of the Sea of Galilee. He travels with his mother, with Mary, also with his brothers and his disciples. I'm going to leave the brothers' conversation out of this episode. A better place for that conversation would be Matthew chapter 1 with the idea of the wedding, the marriage of Mary and Joseph. But also Mark 6, where we learn about the brothers of Jesus by name as James, Joseph, Judas, and Simon. So did Mary have other sons, other children? Mark 6 is a better spot for that than this. But with his mother, his brother, and his disciples. So he's already gathered some disciples. We saw that in chapter 1 yesterday. They stayed there a few days, and then all of a sudden we jump to Jerusalem, just like that. Passover of the Jews is at hand. Jesus went up to Jerusalem. Again, that's a elevational thing. It's south on the map to go from Capernaum to Jerusalem. Passover is Exodus chapter 12, where God has passed over the homes of those Israelites who have painted their doorposts with the blood of the Lamb, just as he instructed them to do, instead of striking them down when he strikes down the firstborn in every household in all of Egypt. So the Jews celebrate the Passover every year to remember that, as God instructed in Exodus 13. It's also one of the three mandatory feasts where the Jews are supposed to pilgrimage to Jerusalem. The whole assembly gathered together. Feast of Unleavened Bread, which follows immediately after the day of Passover, 7-day feast, and then the Feast of Weeks and the Feast of Booths. So Jesus is there, and he goes into the temple, and he sees them selling. They've turned it into a market, and he overturns it. Makes a whip of cords. So imagine Jesus with like a bullwhip, and drives all the animals out, all the people out, turns over their tables, makes a mess of it. Why? This place is supposed to be holy. The temple is supposed to be holy, perfect, set aside for God. They've turned it into a marketplace. A marketplace where most likely theft is happening. Where most likely the religious leaders are taking advantage of the people. They will not let them purchase sacrificial animals for the temple. So if you've traveled from a few hundred miles away for the feast, you're not going to have traveled with your livestock for sacrifice, most likely. You'll have brought money along. But your money's not good in the temple. It has to be temple currency, which is treated as a holy thing of its own. So you trade your money in at whatever going rate the religious leaders want to say it is, and then you have to take that new temple currency and go buy an animal with that money. Bit of a scheme, bit of a scam, and not good. This is why the synoptic gospels Jesus talks about turning it into a den of robbers. The temple is the house of God. We come to the house of God to worship, to receive his gifts, not to do the things you could do in the marketplace down the street. It's set apart. It has its own function, its own purpose. This begs the question. I mentioned the synoptic gospels all mention the temple cleansing. They all have it in Holy Week, right around the time of Passover, right? So the question here is, did Jesus cleanse the temple once? And John is front-loading it? Or did he cleanse the temple twice in his ministry? I don't know that we can fully answer that question. I'm leaning towards twice. The idea that what he quotes, what he says here, like zeal for your house will consume me, from Psalm 69 verse 9, is in the disciples' minds, turning my Father's house into a house of trade, as opposed to calling it a den of robbers. So just going to a different Old Testament source leads me to believe this happened twice, that he does it early in his ministry and he does it right at the end of his ministry. It's possible he did it once. John is not as strict about the timeline of events as the synoptic gospels were, because again, he's writing so much later. So in chapter 1, we see him already calling Simon Peter, or Cephas, even though he doesn't give him that name until later. John can simply reflect on that and acknowledge this is Simon, the one Jesus called Peter. He can bring that across, because his hearers already know who that is. Obviously, the Jews are not going to be happy with Jesus turning over their temple tables, their money tables where they were exchanging things, driving everyone out. So they say, "What sign do you show us for doing these things?" Let me give you a couple of parallels. You can do this with your children. So somebody walks into your classroom, and all of a sudden they just tell you all to leave. Go to this place, I don't know, the gym, go to the soccer field outside, whatever. And they start flipping desks, just turning stuff over. By what authority? Who gave you permission to do this? Who put you in charge? Or the same thing at your office, right? If you go to an office, a place of work, somebody you've not met before perhaps, or you've maybe seen them once, they come in and they just start barking orders, telling you what to do, where to go, and they're commanding and instructing everybody, and they're making a mess as they go, like just shouting stuff. Well, who put you in charge? That's what this group of Jews is saying. Look, we're just doing what we've been doing for generations. This has been going nonstop. This is the Pharisees, the Sadducees. They're the ones in charge. They're the ones who have taught us to do this. The priests, we're all in this. Where are you coming from? What authority do you have that we should let you do this? And theoretically not stone you. Although, again, if it's only the one time, they kill him a couple days later. But I'm leaning towards this being a separate time. The sign Jesus offers them: destroy the temple, I'll rebuild it in 3 days. Now, John tells us, and we can recognize he's talking about his own self, his own flesh, that he will rise again on the 3rd day after they have killed him. And so he does. Good Friday, Easter. As Christians, we celebrate, we rejoice. That's our Passover time, Good Friday. It's our celebration. They don't understand. They look around and they think, well, this temple took 46 years. How could you possibly build it in 3 days? And they don't understand. They're baffled by it. However, John then notes to us that when he rose from the dead, his disciples remembered that he had said this. Mark is pretty much the clearest, I think, of the gospel writers, that the disciples are slow on things, that they don't get it, that they really don't get it, and they make a lot of mistakes. And it's not usually until after Pentecost even, that the disciples kind of snap out of it and things click and they really get it. But here, John is giving us that indication that the time does come. Like after Jesus rises from the dead, they think back on his ministry. They remember this. They remember him saying this. And they make the connection. Then we get a last little bit here, that those who saw the miracles he was doing believed in him, believed in his name. But Jesus, on his part, did not entrust himself to them because he knew all people. He knew their faith. He knew their faith wasn't genuine. He knew what was in man, it ends with here. And that's Genesis chapter 6, verse 5, that the thoughts of the hearts of men are nothing but evil continuously. Jesus knows them. He's God. He knows them. And he's not willing to entrust himself to them. He's not willing to let them be the ones who come with him, who care for him, who get to be his spokesman in the time to come. This would be similar to the group that he fed the 5,000, and they want him to be their bread king. They don't believe in him as God in the flesh who's come to save them from sin, death, and the devil. They've got a different picture in mind, and he's not wanting to be part of it. Just as he didn't want to stick around and be a bread king. So he needs no one to bear witness about him. That's not fair. He needs no one to bear witness about man. Nobody has to tell Jesus the hearts of men because he already knows the hearts of men. Right? You don't have to tell him how wicked we are. He knows. Now, a bit of a side question that's related to this idea of bearing witness. We had John bearing witness to Jesus in chapter 1. Who bears witness about Jesus today? So we don't have people bearing witness about us to Jesus, but he has us bear witness to the world about him. We get to share the good news. We get to share who he is and what he's done with those who are around us, pointing them to Christ's cross and empty tomb.